500 noble maidens, one impossible night, and a kiss that should never have been given. When the most powerful duke in England collapsed at his own betrothal gala, the realm held its breath. 500 women tried to save him. 500 women failed. Then someone broke every rule, defied every expectation, and changed everything with a single, trembling act of courage. But what happens when true love becomes the kingdom's greatest scandal? When the one who holds his heart is the one forbidden to claim it? When magic reveals truths that society would rather keep buried? Subscribe now if you crave stories where love defies impossible odds. Tell me below, what country are you listening from? Now then, let us begin this tale of secrets, enchantment, choice, and a love that rewrote the laws of the heart. Chapter 1. The grand gala of Valebridge glittered like a treasure vault beneath 1,000 chandeliers. 500 noble maidens, floating across the marble floor in silks and diamonds, each more breathtaking than the last, each hoping to capture the heart of Duke Lysander Ravenshade. Irene Vale, meanwhile, was on her hands and knees, scrubbing spilled champagne from the floor and pretending she didn't exist. 6 more hours, Irene muttered to herself, wringing her cloth into a bucket. Just 6 more hours until this spectacle ends. She sat back on her heels, pushing an ink-stained strand of dark hair from her face as her gaze traveled across the ballroom to where he moved from woman to woman. His smile never faltered, his bow never less than perfect, his attention seemingly genuine until the very moment he turned to the next lady. That was the Duke's way. Charming, unreadable, and utterly untouchable. A dangerous combination for any woman foolish enough to believe otherwise. As if sensing Irene's scrutiny, Lysander's silver-gray eyes suddenly locked with hers across the crowded ballroom. One dark eyebrow arched, and the corner of his mouth lifted in that infuriating half-smile he reserved just for her. Irene scowled in response. She was entirely immune to his charms, or more importantly, entirely devoted to appearing immune to his charms, which was far more achievable. As if being impossibly wealthy and powerful wasn't enough, the Duke had to be devastatingly handsome too, and half the noblewomen in the Eastern Marches had been sighing over him since he inherited the title at 23. Tonight wasn't just any gala. It was specifically orchestrated by royal decree for him to choose a bride. The king himself had finally put his foot down, tired of Lysander's reputation and the diplomatic incidents that followed his string of brief courtships. The realm needed an heir. The Duke needed to settle. And 500 hopeful maidens had descended on Valebridge like a flock of jeweled ravens, ready to fight for the privilege. Well, Irene thought bitterly, watching a duchess nearly trip another countess in her eagerness to claim the next dance. His impossible standards haven't stopped them from trying. Perhaps it was his vast estates that drew them, or perhaps it was those sharp cheekbones that could cut glass. Irene wouldn't know. She absolutely did not notice things like that, just like she didn't notice how his rare, genuine laugh made something dangerous and warm unfurl in her chest. Irene cursed under her breath as a passing lord nearly stepped on her fingers. His cologne, heavy with bergamot and entitlement, hit her before his polished boot did. "Is there a reason you're blocking the walkway, girl?" the noble sneered. "To better grovel at your feet, my lord," Irene replied with poisonous sweetness. "Why else would I be here?" The man's face purpled. "How dare you?" A shadow fell over them both, and the lord's expression transformed from fury to fear in an instant. Irene didn't need to turn around to know exactly who stood behind her. "Lord Pemberton," Lysander's voice was velvet over steel, "I believe the card tables are in the East Salon. You seem to have lost your way." The nobleman retreated without another word, and Irene would have considered thanking the Duke if he weren't so, well, if he weren't him. "Enjoying your evening, Inkstains?" Lysander asked, smoothly stepping into her line of vision. Irene pointedly ignored him, scrubbing harder at the stain. He absolutely hated being ignored. It drove him mad. "That champagne coming off as you'd hoped?" he persisted. Irene continued her silence, and then watched in horror as movement flickered in her peripheral vision. The next thing she knew, deep red wine was pooling across the pristine marble beside her cleaning cloth. She looked up to see Lysander deliberately emptying his crystal goblet onto the floor, that insufferable smirk playing at his lips. "Oh, how terribly clumsy of me," he said without a hint of remorse. "Don't you have other people you can torture?" Irene finally snapped. "Like one of the 500 ladies who traveled across the realm just to entertain you? They're just not as entertaining as you," Lysander said lightly. "I mean, I can hardly ask them to clean up after me, can I? Yet you can hardly keep your hands off them either," Irene muttered before she could stop herself. His eyes immediately gleamed with interest, sharp as a hawk spotting prey. "And does that bother you, Vale?" Heat flooded her face. "The only thing that bothers me is having to watch it." "Funny," Lysander mused, leaning casually against the column. "For someone who claims to hate the sight, you certainly stare for an awfully long time whenever it happens. One might think you were enjoying the show." Irene flushed hot with humiliation. "I do not enjoy watching you." "Your Grace," a honeyed voice interrupted. Lady Celestine of Thornwyke appeared at Lysander's elbow, practically thrusting a fresh goblet of wine into his hands. "Please, allow me to fetch you another drink." Irene openly gaped at the woman. The Duke had sent her packing 6 months ago with barely a farewell note, yet here Lady Celestine stood, simpering at his side like a trained spaniel. Irene would never debase herself like that for any man, Duke or not. "Vale," Lysander said, his gaze never leaving Irene's face as he accepted the wine. "Can you fetch me one of those lemon tarts from the dessert table?" Irene stood with an irritated huff. All right, so perhaps she would, but only because it was literally her job to be at his beck and call. That was entirely different from Lady Celestine's shameful display. Entirely. "Can you believe it?" Jarrow appeared beside her at the refreshment table, nervously straightening his livery. His Grace, getting betrothed tonight. Jarrow was the Duke's valet, a position that seemed to leave him in a state of perpetual anxiety. "I really can't," Irene admitted, selecting the least appealing tart she could find. "Oh, aren't you even a little excited?" Jarrow nudged her. "Think of it, a duchess for Valebridge, celebrations throughout the duchy." Irene snorted. "That man can't keep his attention on a woman for more than a fortnight. He's certainly not about to manage it for a lifetime. Look at him already dancing with someone new. If you ask me, he only does it because he knows you're watching," Sarah said, a kitchen maid materializing on Irene's other side with a tray of champagne flutes. "He does it because he can't stand the idea that someone might not worship him," Irene shot back. She'd long ago realized her indifference was the only thing keeping Lysander's attention. If she ever melted under that silver gaze like the others, he'd move on in an instant, and that was exactly what she should want. To be free of his irritating presence, his knowing smirks, and the foolish daydreams that crept in during the dark hours when she couldn't sleep. Sarah leaned in conspiratorially. "You know the King's decree wasn't just a suggestion, right? Lord Chancellor Blackwood himself is here tonight to ensure the Duke makes his choice. By midnight. Or there will be consequences." "Consequences?" Irina asked despite herself. "Loss of his seat on the Royal Council for one," Jarrow whispered. "And rumor has it the king has already selected his preference, his own niece, Lady Isadora, beautiful, accomplished, and conveniently aligned with the king's political interests." "Perfect," Irene muttered. "Another jeweled bird in a golden cage." "Don't let your bitterness show too much, Vale," Sarah teased gently. "Someone might think you actually care who he chooses." "I don't," Irene said too quickly. "I just think it's absurd, this circus, this parade of desperate women, all for a man who's never shown genuine feeling for anyone in his life. Except perhaps one ink-stained maid who argues with him at every opportunity," Jarrow said with a knowing look. Before Irene could snap a retort, the musician struck up a new waltz, and her eyes were drawn against her will back to the dance floor. Lysander was partnering with a striking woman in sapphire silk, someone Irene vaguely recognized as a visiting countess from the Northern Territories. He said something that made the woman laugh, that practiced charm on full display, but even from across the room, Irene could see the emptiness in his smile. As if he felt her gaze, his eyes found hers over the Countess's shoulder. For a moment, just a heartbeat, his mask slipped. She saw something there. Something tired and trapped and achingly familiar. Then the Countess said something. His attention returned to her, and the moment shattered like dropped glass. Irene turned away, her chest tight with emotion she had no right to feel. "I need to get back to work," she said abruptly, leaving Jaro and Sarah behind. The hours crawled by in a blur of spilled drinks, discarded gloves, and whispered gossip that grew increasingly vicious as midnight approached. The noblewomen were circling like sharks now, sensing blood in the water. Every dance with the Duke was scrutinized, every smile analyzed, every touch catalogued as evidence of favoritism. Irene moved through it all like a ghost, present but unseen, listening to fragments of conversation that painted a clearer picture of the night's true purpose. Heard the king's patience has run out entirely. 3 diplomatic incidents in 6 months, all because of his wandering affections. If he doesn't choose by midnight, Blackwood has orders to impose the king's choice. Poor Lady Isidora, she doesn't even want him. That last one made Irene pause. She glanced across the ballroom to where a young woman in cream silk stood by the windows, looking utterly miserable despite her beauty. Lady Isidora, the king's niece, the presumed favorite. She wasn't watching Lysander with the hungry gazes of the other women. Instead, she looked like she wanted to disappear through the floor. Another victim of royal machinations, Irene thought. Just like... She cut the thought off before it could complete itself. Near the dais, Lord Chancellor Blackwood checked his pocket watch for what must have been the 100th time, his expression growing darker with each passing minute. Beside him, several other stern-faced men in royal livery stood sentinel, their presence a clear reminder that this was not merely a social event, but a matter of state. Irene found herself drifting closer to where Lysander stood, accepting congratulations from a group of visiting dignitaries. Up close, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes that no one else seemed to notice. He looked like a man walking toward his own execution. Vale. She startled, realizing he'd somehow extracted himself from the dignitaries and appeared beside her while she'd been lost in thought. "Your Grace," she said formally, aware of the eyes on them. "Dance with me." "I what?" She stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "Dance with me," he repeated, his voice low and urgent. "Just one. Before I have to." He cut himself off, jaw clenching. "I'm a maid," Irene hissed. "You can't dance with a maid at your betrothal gala. Are you mad?" "Probably," he said, and there was something raw in his eyes that made her breath catch. "But I'm asking anyway." "No." The word came out harsher than she'd intended. "Ask one of them. Ask someone appropriate. Ask someone who matters." Something flickered across his face, hurt. Maybe. Or anger. "You think you don't matter?" "I know I don't," Irene said quietly. "Not in your world. Not tonight." For a moment, she thought he might argue. His hand twitched toward hers. His lips parted, as if to speak. "Your Grace," Lord Chancellor Blackwood's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "The hour grows late. We must proceed with your announcement." Lysander's expression shuttered closed, the mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. He gave Irene one last look, something desperate and defeated lurking in those silver eyes before turning away. "Of course, Lord Chancellor," he said smoothly. "I am ready." Irene watched him walk toward the dais, watched 500 women preen and prepare for their moment of potential triumph, watched the king's men close ranks around the Duke like jailers around a prisoner. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever happened tonight would change everything. She just didn't know how much. The musicians fell silent. Lord Chancellor Blackwood stepped forward, his voice ringing through the hushed ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, Duke Lysander Ravenshade will now make his selection." Irene's hands clenched at her sides as Lysander took his place before the assembly. He looked every inch the perfect nobleman, elegant, composed, untouchable. But she'd seen behind that mask. She'd seen the man who deliberately spilled wine just to keep her near him for a few more minutes. The man who defended her against petty nobles. The man who'd just asked a maid to dance at his own betrothal gala? Propriety be damned. Don't choose anyone, her traitorous heart whispered. Choose yourself. Choose freedom. But men like Lysander Ravenshade didn't get to choose freedom. They got duty, and obligation, and cages made of gold. As Lysander opened his mouth to speak, his eyes swept the crowd one last time, and found hers across the sea of silk and diamonds. Time seemed to suspend. The ballroom held its collective breath. Then Lysander smiled that sad, knowing smile that meant goodbye, and looked away. Irene felt something crack inside her chest. This is how it ends, she thought. Not with a confession or a kiss, but with a glance across a crowded room. A moment that means everything and nothing at all. My lords and ladies, Lysander began, his voice steady, despite the storm Irene could see raging behind his eyes. I am deeply honored by your presence here tonight. Irene didn't stay to hear the rest. She slipped through the servants' entrance, past the kitchens, out into the cold night air of the courtyard, where no one could see the tears that finally, treacherously, began to fall. Above her, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the dramas playing out below. In the ballroom, the Duke would make his choice. Some beautiful, appropriate woman would become the next Duchess of Valebridge, and Irene Vale would return to her ink-stained existence, her foolish heart safely locked away where it belonged. By dawn, every noble girl in the ballroom would be dreaming of his ring, of being chosen, of becoming the woman who captured the heart of the most sought-after bachelor in the Eastern Marches. None of them knew it would be the last night the Duke of Ravenshade stood among them awake. Chapter 2. Irene allowed herself exactly 3 minutes in the courtyard, 3 minutes to let the cold night air sting her tear-stained cheeks, 3 minutes to steady her breathing and rebuild the walls around her heart. Then duty called her back inside. The ballroom had transformed in her absence. What had been elegant competition had devolved into something sharper, more vicious. As Irene slipped back through the servants' entrance and retrieved a tray of champagne flutes, she moved through a battlefield of silk and spite. Did you see how desperately she threw herself at him during the quadrille? Absolutely shameless. And her family's fortune is nothing compared to mine. Heard the maid was caught staring at his grace again. How pathetic. Irene's grip tightened on her tray, but she kept her face blank, her steps measured. Near the center of the room, a cluster of the most ambitious noblewomen had formed a tight circle, their fans fluttering like weapons as they assessed and dismissed each other with cutting precision. At the heart of this viper's nest stood Lady Vespera of Thornwyke, resplendent in emerald silk that matched her calculating eyes. Irene had heard the stories, how Vespera had tried to trap the Duke with false claims last spring, how he'd exposed her lies before the entire court, how she'd left Valebridge in disgrace. Yet here she was, returned like a vengeful ghost. Lady Vespera? A foreign nobleman, murmured at her elbow Lord Corvain, an envoy from the king's court, his accent marking him as from the southern territories. Are you quite certain about this course of action? Certain? Vespera's smile was poison wrapped in pearls. My dear Lord Corvain, I'm counting on it. Their voices dropped lower, but Irene caught fragments as she passed. The king's blessing. No other choice. By midnight, one way or another, a cold feeling settled in Irene's stomach. Before she could process what she'd heard, Vespera glided forward, breaking from the crowd with predatory grace. In her hands, she carried an ornate crystal goblet filled with wine so dark it looked almost black. Your Grace, Vespera's voice rang out sweetly. Before you make your announcement, please accept this toast from House Thornwyke to House Ravenshade, a rare vintage from our private cellars, blessed for prosperity and joy. The ballroom quieted. All eyes turned to watch this offering, this public reconciliation between scorned woman and the Duke who'd humiliated her. Lysander stood near the dais, and Irene saw the calculation flash across his face. To refuse would be a public insult. To accept would be political grace. He had no choice, and Vespera knew it. But Irene was close enough now to see what others couldn't, a faint shimmer on the wine's surface, like oil on water. And there, barely visible on the goblet's rim, a sigil that made her blood run cold. She'd seen that mark before, in her father's old books before he died. Old magic, binding magic, forbidden magic. "Don't," Irene breathed. Too quiet for anyone to hear. Lysander's gaze flickered to her for just a heartbeat. She saw the question in his eyes, the moment of hesitation. Then duty won, as it always did. He took the goblet, raised it in acknowledgement of Vespera's house, and drank deeply. "Now then," Lysander said, turning back to the assembly with that perfect smile. "As I was saying, I am honored to announce." He stumbled. The goblet slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor like a gunshot. Lysander's hand reached for the chair behind him, missed, and his knees buckled. The music died mid-note. "Your Grace." Lord Chancellor Blackwood lunged forward. Lysander collapsed, his body crumpling with terrible finality. His eyes rolled back, then closed, and he lay utterly still on the ballroom floor. Chaos erupted. "Poison!" someone screamed. "Assassination! Guards! Size everyone!" Irene was running before conscious thought caught up with action. She shoved past ladies and lords, her tray clattering to the floor, propriety abandoned. Guards moved to intercept her, but she was faster, dropping to her knees beside Lysander's motionless form. "Don't touch him," a guard barked, reaching for her. "I'm checking for breath, you fool," Irene snapped, pressing her fingers to Lysander's throat. His pulse beat strong and steady beneath her touch, but his chest rose and fell too slowly, too deeply. This wasn't death. This was something worse. "Make way!" A figure in midnight blue robes swept through the crowd. Master Aldrich, the court mage, his face grim. He knelt beside Lysander, hands hovering over the Duke's body as arcane words spilled from his lips. Golden light flickered, then died. "Well?" Blackwood demanded. "Not poison," Aldrich said quietly. "This is a binding enchantment, an enforced slumber, ancient and powerful, tied directly to matters of the heart." A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. Lady Vespera stood frozen, her expression perfectly arranged in shock, but Irene saw the gleam of triumph in her eyes. "Can it be broken?" someone asked. Aldrich's gaze swept the 500 noblewomen, then settled on Irene with uncomfortable intensity before moving away. "There is a way, according to the old laws. Only one way." "Speak plainly, mage," Blackwood commanded. "The woman who truly holds the Duke's heart," Aldrich said slowly, as if each word cost him, "may wake him with true love's kiss." The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the ballroom exploded with female voices, each noblewoman certain she was the one, each demanding to be first to try, each convinced this was destiny delivering them the Duke's hand. "Order!" Blackwood roared. "Everyone back! The Duke will be moved to his chambers. We will proceed systematically." Guards moved forward, lifting Lysander onto a stretcher. As they carried him toward the doors, Irene felt hands on her shoulders, a steward, pulling her back, away, back to her proper place among the servants. "Wait," she started. "Back to your duties, girl," the steward said firmly. As she was pushed aside, Irene's eyes stayed locked on Lysander's face, peaceful, unreachable, lost to whatever spell Vespera had woven. Then his hand moved, just a twitch, his fingers curling as if reaching for someone just beyond his grasp. The movement was toward her. The steward hadn't seen it. No one had seen it but her. It was nothing, Irene told herself fiercely. A muscle spasm, a side effect of the enchantment. It meant nothing. But as the doors closed behind Lysander's unconscious form, and 500 noblewomen began their preening preparations to prove their love, Irene stood frozen in the servants' corner, her heart hammering against her ribs. That reaching hand lingered in her mind like a brand. Chapter 3. The Duke's chamber had been transformed into a stage for spectacle. Lysander lay on his grand 4-poster bed, hands folded across his chest like a carved effigy. Around him stood a grim audience. Lord Chancellor Blackwood representing the king, the household steward with his ledger and tight-lipped disapproval, Master Aldrich the court mage, with his arcane instruments, and a handful of servants, including, to Irene's horror, herself. "You'll assist with the proceedings," the steward had informed her curtly. "Steady the women. Observe his grace's condition. Report any changes." So now she stood at the bedside like a reluctant priestess, watching as 500 noble women prepared to kiss the man she'd spent years pretending not to love. The system was brutally efficient. Each woman was announced, escorted to the bedside, given one attempt, then ushered out. The line stretched down the corridor and out of sight. "Lady Arabella of Westmarch," the steward intoned. A blonde beauty swept in, all confidence and calculated grace. She leaned over Lysander, pressed her lips to his with theatrical passion, then pulled back expectantly. "Nothing." "Next," Blackwood said flatly. The parade began in earnest. Some women approached with reverence, treating it like a sacred ritual. Others were brazenly seductive, as if passion alone could break the spell. One duchess tried to slip him her tongue. Irene physically pulled her back. "This is a kiss, not a tavern conquest," Irene snapped. The duchess glared. "And what would a maid know about breaking enchantments?" "More than you," Irene thought bitterly, but held her tongue. By the 50th attempt, the absurdity had become almost numbing. A countess fainted dead away before her lips even touched his. Another smeared so much rouge on his mouth that Irene had to wipe it away with a cloth, her hands trembling with something that felt dangerously close to possessiveness. "My turn should come before hers," a viscountess argued with the woman ahead of her. "Everyone knows magic responds better to higher rank." "That's ridiculous. Magic must be broken by a duchess, not a mere countess. I am engaged to a prince, which makes me practically royal." "Silence," Irene hissed, surprising herself with her venom. "This isn't a competition for who has the fanciest title. Either kiss him or leave." Jarrow, stationed near the door, caught her eye and mouthed, "Jealous?" Irene glared daggers at him. But as woman after woman pressed their lips to Lysander's unresponsive mouth, something ugly was growing in Irene's chest. Not jealousy, though, that was there too, but a deeper, more painful anger. At herself. At her powerlessness. At the fact that she stood here watching strangers touch him, while she couldn't even admit to herself how much she wanted to be the one to wake him. "Lady Vespera of Thornwyke," the steward announced. Irene's head snapped up. Vespera glided in, her expression perfectly composed, and bent to kiss the duke she'd likely cursed. The audacity was breathtaking. Nothing happened, naturally. "Such a shame," Vespera murmured, though her eyes held no sorrow at all. "I had hoped." "Out," Irene said coldly. As the numbers climbed 100, 200, 300, Irene found her mind drifting to a memory she'd tried to bury. She was 12, maybe 13. A summer storm had blown in with vicious speed, and young Lysander, 15, gangly, not yet grown into his father's title, had been checking the stables when the roof began to collapse. Irene had been nearby, sneaking books from the estate library. She'd heard the crack of timber, the horse's scream, Lysander's shout. She'd run inside without thinking, found him pinned beneath a fallen beam, water rising from the flooded river that ran behind the stables. She'd pulled and dragged and screamed for help until finally, miraculously, she'd gotten him free. Later, as they sat shivering in the kitchen while the servants fussed, Lysander had taken her hand. "I'll always remember this," he'd said, his gray eyes solemn and utterly sincere. "I'll always remember you." She'd believed him. A week later, the story had vanished. No one spoke of it. The official account said Lysander had escaped on his own, a young lord's courage in the face of danger. Irene's name appeared nowhere. She'd assumed it meant nothing to him after all, that his promise had been empty words, forgotten as soon as it was convenient. Only now, years later, did she wonder if perhaps the story had been erased, if perhaps a noble heir, owing his life to a common-born girl, had been too scandalous for the official histories. 499, the steward announced wearily. 500, came the final call. Lady Isadora, the king's niece, approached with visible reluctance. She kissed Lysander's forehead gently, almost apologetically, then stepped back with relief written across her face. "No change," Irene reported, her voice hoarse from hours of repetition. Silence fell over the chamber, thick and suffocating. 500 noblewomen, 500 kisses. Not one had stirred him. Lord Chancellor Blackwood's face was ashen. "This is unprecedented. If no noble can wake him," someone whispered, "then who can?" Master Aldrich cleared his throat, drawing all eyes. The spell's wording, Lord Chancellor, was quite specific. The woman who truly holds the Duke's heart. It made no stipulation about rank or birth. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Blackwood's gaze swept the room, landing on each servant in turn before settling on Irene. "You cannot mean—" "I mean," Aldrich said carefully, "that perhaps we have been looking in the wrong places." Irene's stomach dropped to her feet. Every eye in the room turned to her. Chapter 4. "Absolutely not." Irene's voice cut through the shocked silence like a blade. "I'm a maid. This is madness." Before anyone could respond, she turned and fled the chamber, ignoring the protests behind her. Her feet carried her to the servants' wing, to the small room she shared with Sarah. She pressed her back against the door, heart hammering, trying to unsee the way they'd all looked at her, like she was somehow the answer to a riddle she didn't understand. By morning, the investigation had begun in earnest. Irene kept to the edges as Captain Thorne, head of the Duke's Guard, questioned Lady Vespera in the estate's withdrawing room. Lord Corvain stood beside her, his diplomatic smile firmly in place. "A harmless charm of affection, Captain," Vespera insisted, her voice honey-sweet. "Something to encourage favorable feelings." How was I to know it would react so violently? These old family recipes are notoriously unpredictable. "Unpredictable," Thorne repeated flatly. "The Duke is unconscious, my lady. That seems rather predictable to me." "I swear on House Thornwyke's honor, I meant no harm." Vespera's eyes were wide. "Innocent. Ask Master Aldrich. Such charms are common enough at courtship events." Perhaps the Duke simply had an adverse reaction? From her position near the doorway, Irene watched Lord Corvain nod solemnly. "Lady Vespera came to me for advice, Captain. As a representative of the King's court, I assured her that minor enchantments were overlooked, given the circumstances. The King himself is eager to see the Duke wed." The implication was clear. This had tacit royal approval. Thorne's jaw tightened, but he had no authority to challenge a king's envoy. "Master Aldrich, your assessment?" The mage, looking exhausted, rubbed his temples. "The spell is more complex than a simple charm of affection. It's designed to expose truth, to reveal either the one the Duke loves or the one who truly loves him. A test of the heart, if you will." "And the purpose of such a test?" Thorne demanded. Aldrich glanced at Lord Corvain, then away. "I cannot say for certain, but Irene heard what he didn't say. This was meant to humiliate Lysander, to force his hand by exposing his feelings, or lack thereof, before the entire realm. They're going to get away with it," Irene muttered later, scrubbing pots in the kitchen with more force than necessary. Sarah worked beside her, unusually quiet. "The king wanted him married. Vespera wanted revenge. Seems like everyone got what they wanted, except the Duke. And except whoever actually—" Irene cut herself off. "Loves him?" Sarah finished gently. "That's you, isn't it?" "Don't be absurd." "Irene." Sarah set down her dishcloth. "I've watched you for 3 years. I've seen how you look at him when you think no one's watching. Everyone looks at him. He's—" Irina stirred helplessly. "Him. Not like you do." Sarah paused. "And not like he looks at you. He doesn't." "He does." Jarro appeared in the doorway, his face drawn with worry. "He's always looked at you differently. Haven't you ever wondered why his affairs are so brief? So theatrical? It's like he's performing them." Irene's hands stilled. "What do you mean?" "I mean they're strategic," Jarro said quietly. "A week with Lady So-and-so, 3 days with the Countess of wherever. Just long enough to cause a scandal, just long enough to distract everyone from—" He stopped. From what? Irene demanded. From wherever his heart actually lies. Jarrow met her eyes. I've dressed him after every one of those encounters. He's never happy, never satisfied. It's like he's trying to bury something. The words hit Irene like cold water. She'd always interpreted his endless string of lovers as proof of his emotional emptiness. But what if it had been the opposite? What if it had been protection? That doesn't mean she started. Mrs. Hemsworth wants to send you away, Sarah interrupted. I heard her talking to the steward. She thinks your proximity to His Grace will bring trouble, that the scandal of a maid being considered for the kiss trial will destroy you. Irene's throat tightened. Maybe she's right. Or maybe she's afraid you'll actually wake him, Jarrow said. Late that night, Irene found herself outside Lysander's chamber. The guards had changed shifts. No one noticed her slip inside. He lay exactly as before, peaceful, unreachable, caught in whatever dream the spell had woven. She sat in the chair beside his bed, her voice barely a whisper. I've loved you since I was 12 years old, she confessed to his sleeping form. Since you promised to remember me, even though you didn't, even though I was erased from your history like I never mattered. Her hands twisted in her lap. But I can't kiss you, because if I do, and nothing happens, it will destroy me. It will prove that everything I felt was one-sided, that I was just another fool who mistook your charm for something real. Silence answered her. So I'm a coward, she whispered, and you'll sleep forever because I'm too afraid to risk my heart. The next morning, Mrs. Hemsworth gathered the senior staff in the estate's dining hall. The situation is untenable, the housekeeper announced. Lord Chancellor Blackwood has proposed that we expand the trial. If no noblewoman could wake him, perhaps someone of common birth might. Shocked murmurs rippled through the room. The staff? Someone asked incredulously. If the spell responds to true love rather than rank, Mrs. Hemsworth said stiffly, then we must consider all possibilities. Every eye turned to Irene. No. She stood abruptly, chair scraping against stone. I won't. I can't. Irene, Mrs. Hemsworth said, almost kindly. If there's even a chance. There isn't. Irene backed toward the door, panic clawing up her throat. I'm nobody. I mean nothing to him. Find someone else. She ran before anyone could stop her, down corridors and out into the gardens, her breath coming in gasps. Behind her, she heard a guard's voice carry through the open window. If she doesn't wake him, no one will. Chapter 5. The staff trials began at dawn. Irene watched from the corridor, pressed against the wall like a shadow, as they brought the women in, one by one. Sarah went first, kissing Lysander's cheek with the careful reverence of someone handling holy relics. Nothing. The head cook followed, then the steward's daughter, then 2 more maids, whose names Irene couldn't remember, through the roaring in her ears. Each kiss landed softly on his forehead or cheek. Each time, Lysander remained perfectly, impossibly still. Perhaps it requires a direct kiss, Master Aldrich suggested after the 5th failure. On the lips, as is traditional. The remaining women tried again. Still nothing. Irene should have felt relieved. Instead, dread coiled tighter around her ribs with each failure, because she knew what came next. Where is she? Mrs. Hemsworth's voice carried into the corridor. Where's Vale? Irene tried to back away, but strong hands caught her shoulders. Captain Thorne, his grip gentle but implacable. No more running, he said quietly, and steered her into the chamber. Every face turned toward her. Lord Chancellor Blackwood, Master Aldrich, Mrs. Hemsworth, Jarrow and Sarah, and Lysander, still lost in his enchanted sleep, beautiful and unreachable. I can't, Irene said, her voice breaking. Please don't make me. You've served this household for 8 years, Mrs. Hemsworth said, her usual sternness softened by something that might have been pity. You've been loyal beyond measure. His Grace singles you out constantly, the steward added. He seeks your company, your conversation, your... That doesn't mean anything, Irene interrupted desperately. The realm cannot languish. Because you're afraid, Lord Chancellor Blackwood said bluntly. We have tried everyone else. You are the last possibility. And if I try and fail, Irene's voice cracked, if I kiss him and nothing happens, then everyone will know. She couldn't finish, that she loved him, that she'd always loved him, that her heart had been his since she was 12 years old, and his failure to wake would prove it had all been pathetically one-sided. Or it proves nothing at all about you, Master Aldrich said quietly. Magic is not an exact science, Miss Vale, but right now, you are our only hope. Jarrow stepped forward, his eyes kind. He's been waiting for you, I think, all this time. Irene looked at Lysander's sleeping face and felt something crack open inside her chest. Everyone out, she whispered. Miss Vale, out. Her voice was steel. If I'm doing this, I'm doing it alone. After a moment's hesitation, they filed out, leaving only Master Aldrich by the door, a necessary witness, but at least a distant one. Irene sank into the chair beside Lysander's bed, her hands trembling. Up close, without his mask of charm, he looked younger, vulnerable. The man beneath the Duke, the boy who'd once held her hand and promised to remember. I hate you for this, she whispered, but her fingers brushed his cheek with infinite tenderness. I hate that you made me love you. I hate that you probably don't even know. And I hate that I'm about to humiliate myself in front of everyone, because I can't bear the thought of you sleeping forever. She leaned closer, her heart a wild bird in her chest. Wake up, my lord, she breathed against his lips. You've slept through the only thing that ever mattered. She kissed him. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Irene's soul prepared to shatter. Then Lysander's breath deepened. His fingers curled against the sheets. His chest rose with sudden, gasping life. His eyes opened, silver gray and confused, and focused entirely on her. Ink stains. His voice was rough with sleep, but her nickname, was unmistakable. Behind her, the door burst open as the others rushed back in. He's awake. The maid woke him. Impossible. A servant broke the spell. Irene jerked back as if burned, suddenly aware of the dozens of eyes on them, the political implications crashing down like an avalanche. The king's envoy looked horrified. Mrs. Hemsworth's hand covered her mouth. Lord Chancellor Blackwood's face had gone white. Blackwood stammered. This complicates everything. The king cannot, a common maid, the scandal. Irene, Lysander said, trying to sit up, but 3 days of enchanted sleep had left him weak. Wait. She was already running, down the corridor, through the servants' passages, anywhere away from the accusation in those stairs, the scandal she'd just created, the impossible truth her kiss had revealed. Irene, Lysander's voice echoed behind her, desperate and hoarse. Come back, please. But she was gone, and behind her she heard Jarrow's worried voice. Your Grace, you shouldn't be out of bed. And Lord Corvain's cold assessment, the king will not be pleased. And underneath it all, the whisper that would destroy them both. The poor maid holds the Duke's heart. Chapter 6. 2 days passed in a blur of whispers and averted gazes. Irene kept her head down, scrubbing floors that didn't need scrubbing, polishing silver that already gleamed. The entire estate buzzed with gossip, the maid who woke the Duke, the scandal of it, what it meant, and she endured it in silence. Jarrow appeared 3 times with sealed letters. Each time, Irene refused to take them. He wants to speak with you, Jarrow said, on the 3rd attempt. I'm working. Irene, tell His Grace I'm busy. She turned away before Jarrow could see her hands shaking. From the servants' gossip, she learned that Lysander was handling the aftermath with icy efficiency. Lady Vespera and Lord Corvain had been placed under guard, pending the king's judgment. Delegations came and went. Messages arrived daily from the capital, each one sealed with the royal crest. And through it all, Lysander asked for her, sent letters she wouldn't read, searched for her in corridors she carefully avoided. She told herself it was better this way, cleaner. Whatever the kiss had meant, whatever truth it had revealed, could only bring them both ruin. On the 3rd evening, Irene sought refuge in the library. No one came here after dark. She could work in peace, shelving books, and pretending her world wasn't crumbling. She was halfway up the ladder, dusting a high shelf, when footsteps echoed in the doorway. "I don't have time, Jero," she said without turning. "Whatever letters His Grace wants delivered, I'm not." Liar. The word was soft, dangerous, and decidedly not Jero's voice. Irene nearly fell off the ladder. She scrambled down, turned, and found Lysander leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her with an expression that made her heart stutter. She dropped into a curtsy, muscle memory overriding panic. "Your Grace, I didn't realize that I'd come looking for you myself?" He pushed off the frame, moving into the room with predatory grace. "After you ignored 3 letters and avoided me for 2 days. Yes, Irene, I came looking. I've been working. You've been hiding." He stopped a few feet away. "Did you read them? The letters?" "Yes," she lied. Another lie. His smile was sharp. "I know you didn't, because if you had, we wouldn't still be having this conversation. Your Grace, let me read them to you then." His voice softened, and the change was more devastating than anger. The first one said, "I'm sorry if waking to your face frightened you. I can think of no better sight to open my eyes to. But I understand if you don't feel the same." Irene's throat closed. The second said, "Did you mean it? The kiss? Or was it only duty?" He took a step closer. And the third said, "I have loved you since before Ravenshade was mine to rule. Since you were 12 and fearless, and dragged me out of a flooded stable when you should have saved yourself." "That's not—" Her voice broke. "You don't remember that. No one remembers. It was erased. My father erased it from the records," Lysander said quietly. "Not from my memory. Never from my memory. A noble heir owing his life to a common-born girl, it was unthinkable, scandalous. So he buried it, threatened everyone involved, and told me to forget you. And you did," Irene whispered. "You became the Duke, and I became invisible. I pretended you were invisible." His hand reached up, almost touching her cheek before dropping. "Every affair, every lover, every scandal, it was all theater. To keep my father distracted. To keep the king from looking too closely at where my heart actually lay. To protect you from being used as leverage against me. That's—" She shook her head, tears burning. "You paraded them in front of me. Do you know what that felt like?" "I saw your jealousy," he said simply. "It was the only proof I had that you cared. That maybe, impossibly, you felt even a fraction of what I felt." "You're cruel," she choked out. "I'm desperate," he corrected. "I have been for years. Loving someone I couldn't have, couldn't claim, couldn't even admit to wanting, without destroying us both." "I'm a maid," Irene said, but the words came out pleading rather than firm. "You're the woman who saved my life, who argues with me, who looks at me like I'm just a man instead of a title." He finally touched her fingers, gentle on her chin, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. "You're the woman I love. The only woman I've ever loved. I've loved you since I was 12, she confessed, the words tumbling out like a dam breaking. "Since you held my hand and promised to remember. I've loved you through every affair, every scandal, every moment I told myself I was a fool for caring." His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Then we're both fools." The door burst open. A messenger in royal livery stood panting in the doorway, his face pale. "Your Grace." Urgent message from His Majesty. Lysander's hand dropped from Irene's face. "What is it?" "The king demands your presence at court. Immediately." The messenger swallowed hard. "And he's issued a decree. You are to wed Lady Isadora within the month. Enchantment or no enchantment, your delay has ended. The marriage will proceed." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Lysander's expression went cold, that ducal mask sliding back into place, but not before Irene saw the devastation underneath. "Tell His Majesty," Lysander said quietly, "that I will attend him tomorrow." The messenger bowed and fled. In the silence that followed, Irene and Lysander stood frozen, the confession hanging between them like something beautiful and already broken. Chapter 7. The great hall of the royal palace glittered with hostile magnificence. Every noble family of consequence had gathered, summoned by the king, to witness what they assumed would be Duke Ravenshade's chastisement and the announcement of his arranged marriage. Irene stood against the back wall with the other servants, trying to make herself smaller, invisible. But she felt every stare, every whispered speculation. That's her, the maid, the one who woke him. At the front of the hall, on a dais beside the king's throne, sat Lady Isidora in pale blue silk. She looked lovely and miserable in equal measure, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. When her eyes met Irene's across the crowded hall, there was no malice in them, only weary resignation. Another pawn in the king's game. The king himself, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, rose from his throne as Lysander was announced. The duke entered alone, dressed in formal black, his expression carefully neutral. Duke Ravensshade. The king's voice carried through the hall like thunder. You have been summoned to answer for the chaos that has befallen your house, and by extension, our realm. Lysander bowed with perfect correctness. Your Majesty, an enchantment was placed upon you at a gala meant to secure the stability of our kingdom through your marriage. This attack, this assault on a peer of the realm cannot go unanswered. The king's gaze swept the assembly. It has created scandal, uncertainty, and dangerous rumors that threaten the very fabric of our social order. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the nobles. However, the king continued, we are not without mercy. We offer a simple solution. You will wed our niece, Lady Isidora, as originally planned. This union will present a united front, quell the rumors, and restore order. The peculiarity of your awakening will be dismissed as a curious accident of magic. Nothing more. The dismissal was clear. Irene's kiss her truth, her love reduced to a footnote, an embarrassing anomaly to be buried and forgotten. Lysander was silent for a long moment. Then he straightened, and something in his posture changed. The careful neutrality fell away, revealing steel beneath. Your Majesty, with respect, I must decline. Shocked gasps echoed through the hall. The king's eyes narrowed dangerously. You decline? The enchantment was not a random attack, Lysander said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. It was a calculated scheme orchestrated with tacit approval from certain parties, designed to humiliate me and coerce me into a politically convenient marriage. The spell was specifically crafted to expose matters of the heart, to reveal true love as a weapon against me. Lord Corvain, standing among the king's advisors, went pale. It backfired. Lysander continued, not because of accident or magical quirk, but because it worked exactly as intended. It revealed the truth, that I was awakened by true love's kiss, from Irene Vale. Every head turned toward the back of the hall, toward her. Irene's heart stopped. A maid, someone whispered. Common born. Impossible. I have loved her, Lysander said quietly, but his voice cut through the whispers like a blade, since before Ravensshade was mine to rule. Since she saved my life as a boy, an act my father erased from history because it didn't suit the narrative of noble supremacy. I have loved her through years of pretense, through calculated affairs meant to protect her from exactly this kind of scrutiny, and I love her still. He turned to face the king directly. If loving her is treason, Your Majesty, then let my heart stand trial. The hall erupted. Nobles shouted, some in outrage, some in shock. But beneath the aristocratic fury, Irene heard something else. The servants lining the walls were silent, watching with something like hope. Miss Vale, the king's voice cut through the chaos, cold and sharp. Step forward. Irene's legs moved before her mind could catch up. She walked through the parting crowd, feeling hundreds of eyes on her, until she stood beside Lysander, in front of the throne. The king studied her with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. What do you have to say for yourself, girl? Her mouth was dry as dust, but she forced the words out. I love him, Your Majesty. For his title? His wealth? For the man he is beneath all that. Her voice grew steadier. I never sought power or position. I only ever wanted his safety and happiness. If my presence threatens the stability of your realm, I will leave. I will go anywhere. Do anything. To protect him from scandal. How noble, the king said dryly. How convenient. It's not convenient. The words burst out before she could stop them. It's terrifying. I'm a maid. I have no right to love a duke. No business standing here. No illusions about how this story is supposed to end. But I've loved him since I was 12 years old. And that love has never asked for anything except that he be happy. Silence fell over the hall, thick and absolute. Then Lady Isadora rose from her seat. Uncle, she said quietly, may I speak? The king's expression flickered with surprise, but he nodded. Isadora turned to face the assembly. I have no desire to marry a man whose heart belongs to another. I have never sought this match. To force it now would make prisoners of us all. She looked at Irene, and something like kinship passed between them. Love that asks for nothing is rarer than any title. Perhaps that's the kind of nobility we should value. Murmurs of agreement, tentative at first, then growing stronger, rippled through the hall. Not from the nobles in the front, but from the servants lining the walls, the lesser knights, the younger sons and daughters who understood being overlooked. The king's jaw tightened. Irene watched him calculate, saw the moment political reality outweighed personal preference. Lysander commanded fierce loyalty from his people. To punish this openly would breed resentment, possibly even unrest. Finally, the king leaned back in his throne, his expression unreadable. It seems, he said slowly, that our realm has become more progressive than we realized. Very well. If Duke Ravenshade insists on this unconventional match, we will not stand in his way. His smile was thin and shrewd. Let it be known that our kingdom values true nobility of spirit over accidents of birth. Let this union stand as proof of our enlightened rule. He was spinning it, Irene realized, turning potential scandal into propaganda, making himself look magnanimous instead of defeated. Lady Isadora will be betrothed to the Earl of Westmarch, the king continued smoothly, a match far more suited to her temperament. Isadora's shoulders sagged with visible relief. The king's gaze fixed on Irene one last time. Rise, child. If you're to be a duchess, you'll need to stop cowering. 3 months later, the gardens of Ravenshade Estate bloomed with late summer roses, their perfume heavy on the evening air. Irene stood on the balcony overlooking the grounds, still not quite used to the weight of silk against her skin. The formal way the staff now addressed her. Duchess, they called her. Some still stumbled over it. She understood the feeling. Arms slid around her waist from behind, and Lysander's chin came to rest on her shoulder. Any regrets, Vale? He murmured against her ear. She leaned back into him, smiling. I miss being able to order you to clean up your own messes. I miss deliberately creating messes just to keep you near me. You still do that? Yes, but now you're contractually obligated to stay. His lips brushed her temple. Considerably more efficient. She turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face, still marveling that she was allowed this, that this brilliant, impossible man was hers. Some things never change. And some things, he said softly, lowering his mouth to hers, change everything. The kiss was gentle, unhurried, full of promises kept and futures yet written. When they finally pulled apart, the stars had begun to appear above the gardens, glittering like captured starlight. Just like the night of the gala, Irene thought. But this time, she wasn't on her knees scrubbing floors. This time, she was exactly where she belonged. I love you, she whispered. I know, Lysander said, that infuriating smirk playing at his lips. You woke me up, remember? She laughed and pulled him back down for another kiss, and somewhere in the gardens below, the servants smiled and turned away, giving their duke and duchess their moment of peace. After all, everyone knew how the story ended now. The poor maid became the duchess, and the duke who had everything finally found the only thing that mattered. Love. And so, dear listeners, the maid who once scrubbed floors beneath crystal chandeliers now danced upon them as Duchess of Valebridge. The duke who had everything finally found the only thing that truly mattered. Some say the enchantment was a curse. but perhaps it was the greatest gift they ever received, for it forced them to speak truths they'd hidden for years, to risk everything for a love society deemed impossible. After all, the most powerful magic isn't found in ancient spells. It's found in the courage to love someone, despite every reason not to. So tell me, dear listener, did this tale capture your heart? If you crave more stories of forbidden love and defiant courage, subscribe now and join us for the next chapter. Leave a comment below. Do you believe true love can survive society's cruelest judgments? Until we meet again, remember, sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones that should never have been written at all. Thanks for watching.